Well, today we have the privilege of interviewing Paul Robertson, a youth specialist. Hey, Paul, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I was reading a little bit about you, and it's an impressive list. You're an associate with CPYU, which is the Center for Parent and Youth Understanding in Pennsylvania, and you've been doing that for 25 years. And actually, what I found really fascinating is that the website, cpyu.org, for those of you watching, had so many great resources around COVID-19 and how to deal with youth. You've also been with Youth Unlimited and Youth for Christ in Toronto for over 40 years. You are a youth culture specialist. You've helped thousands of social workers, civil leaders, parents, and pastors. And so it really is a privilege and an honor to have you with us today. Thank you for that. I'm so glad to have you here. And so just to kind of jump in, I mean, obviously this world is going through this COVID-19 pandemic, as they're calling it. And I was just wondering, you're a youth specialist. First of all, how do you get a title like that, and what does that mean? What does it mean to be a youth specialist?
Well, I became a youth culture specialist by default. There actually is no training for it. In 1995, Walt Mueller from the Center for Parent Youth Understanding wrote a book called Understanding Today's Youth Culture, which I read. We connected. I've always been fascinated by adolescents and their culture. I raised 4 boys of my own, have 6 grandkids now. And so I'm an avid reader, researcher, just love to learn more about kids. And then what I started 25, 30 years ago was doing seminars, mainly for parents, but youth workers, pastors, etc. So a specialist is someone who continues to study a chosen field. So I'm not an expert in youth culture, I'm just a specialist.
Well, you've had a lot of experience, and I think that does make you an expert. And so, yeah, what are some of the major issues that you see facing youth right now, especially during COVID?
Well, this whole COVID thing really has shut down their normal world. I mean, you think about it's been 9 or 10 months since the pandemic started, and 9 or 10 months out of the life of a 15-year-old kid is very much larger than if you took 10 months out of my life, and I'm 68 years old.
Right.
And not only is it a larger percentage of their time that they've lost for normal growth and development, but they'll never get it back during a time when they really are developing mentally, socially, spiritually, morally, and I'm not sure we ever get that back, but it has wreaked havoc on a lot of kids, not only in our country, but around the world.
Yeah, so, I mean, as you look at that, what do you see as maybe some of the potential long-term effects that we just need to be aware of?
Well, I was reflecting the last couple of months on this and kind of trying to look back on 40 years of being involved with kids. And, there's a couple of things that pop out for me. One is the whole area of self-identity and their identity formation, which used to happen when you'd be at school hanging around with your friends, being involved in youth group and going to church and doing all of these things. And so many of their normal activities and so much of their normal life has been shut down. And they're just spending endless hours on screens, online. And, what's portrayed online in terms of what you should be is very much different than what we want our kids to become. So you have girls who are addicted to social media,
Right.
who are trying on different personas. If one doesn't work, you go to the next one. Boys that are addicted and hooked on online gaming, where every gamer thinks he's going to become a master at it and gives these boys a sense of achievement. And so their identities are coming off what they're learning online and what they're doing online rather than what they really are. Character doesn't matter online. Online is all about achieving things and advertising and all kinds of other things. Character is not important. And to me, that's the biggest danger of what's going on out there.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think with social media, it's more what they're trying to take from our kids rather than what they're trying to invest in our kids. And I think that's something really pertinent to know, especially for parents and grandparents watching. And so I agree with you. I think that's a real good observation that identity is at risk. So maybe then to help our viewers, what are some things that could be done to help our youth who are at risk find that sense of identity and find that sense of purpose, especially now since we're kind of in a lockdown state?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the good things about the pandemic, if there's any good in it, and I'm sure God will see some great things happen out of this, is that they have been locked up with their parents for a long time. And as difficult as that can be, it can be a wonderful time if parents are proactive in deepening their relationships with their kids, doing things together like playing board games and just having conversations, going for walks. I was suggesting to some of them that this is a great time for their kids to connect maybe with relatives that they don't see very often, phone calls to grandma and grandpa. And so we really have to focus on that personal side of communications, and moms and dads. And I know they're tired out from doing all this. I'm fortunate that it's just my wife and myself, but there's that whole stress of being locked up. But parents need to see this as an opportunity where they can engage their kids in meaningful conversations and discussions, and be good question askers, and not be afraid to ask your kids how they're doing. How are you doing mentally? How are you doing physically? And to just ask that question and trigger some conversations.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think that's really great proactive advice. And I think a lot of parents I talk to, they talk at their children instead of talking with
Yes.
them. And so what you said is active listening, which is really a great key. So maybe another question that someone might be asking though is, what if my youth, my teen doesn't want to talk to me? What do I do then? What have you seen, maybe some tips that could help parents who are having difficulty navigating those conversations, even getting their kids to open up and talk to them?
Well, I think prayer is number one. I mean, when all else fails, we go to prayer, and praying for our kids, praying for ourselves. I think one of the greatest challenges for parents is how do you curb the amount of time that your kids are spending online, on the screen? And, research shows that any kid that's spending more than 2 hours per day online outside of schoolwork tends to be a less happy young person. So 2 hours seems to be that critical mark. But research is showing that during the pandemic, most kids are viewing an extra 3 hours on top of that. And so somehow parents need to come to terms with, how do we begin to curb the amount of screen time? And I think it's a little bit at a time. And then, you replace that with personal activities. I always find that parents perhaps aren't the greatest question askers. I actually have a word file that has 173 questions that you could ask your kids at any time and that your kids could ask you. And I've given that to hundreds of parents. And it's just a discussion starter because we get tired of the same old questions. And besides, there's no hockey to talk about.
Right.
So we really get stumped with our kids.
That would be a great resource. Is there a place that people can access this kind of a resource, somewhere they could go to find that?
I don't have it on my website, but if they email just paul@paulrobertson.ca, and just say 173 questions, I'd be happy to send them the Word file. Or you can get to me through my website, which is paulrobertson.ca.
Wow,
Happy to send that to anybody.
173 questions. That's a lot to talk about. And I also think there's some power in presence too. So I think sometimes we think we have to be experts, have all the answers, be able this brilliant theologian and philosopher. But really, are you finding that a lot of kids just want someone to be with them? Would that help?
Well, I've been working with kids for 46 years now, going back to when I was a school teacher in 1975. And I've said this for years. I've never, in 41 plus years of youth ministry, ever met a young person who didn't want to have a healthy relationship with an adult. And that includes the parents. The parents' voices speak much louder than the voices of social media and the voices of online gaming. And parents need to just speak truth and love into the lives of their kids, and just being close. One of the best things a family can do is to have 5 meals together per week or more. And it doesn't matter which meal it is. And all the research shows, and this has been repeated over the last 25 or 30 years, that families that eat together stay together, they have deeper relationships, and they have kids who are less likely to be involved in the negatives of culture like smoking and drinking and all the other issues which we don't have time to get into. But just being together over a meal. I mean, Jesus had it right when he spent time dining with people and building relationships with them. And we need to do that as moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas.
Wow, that is so good. Thank you for that really great practical advice. So prayer, be present, 5 meals, talk actively, less than 2 hours of screen time, and just be with your kids. Invest in them, speak life into them. Thank you so much, Paul, for being with us today. That has been a huge help to so many, and we really appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you for being a youth specialist and sticking with it.